Welcome back to Photoshop. So today we're going to have a little fun and I'm going to teach you how to make things glow inside of Adobe Photoshop. Now, this is a very easy tutorial, and if you'd like to follow along today, this is an image that you can download from Pixabay, and I have no affiliation, but feel free to go down in the description and I'll post the link in there so you can go ahead and follow along. And remember, when you're trying to follow along, most likely you're not going to pick up all the steps, so you're going to have to constantly stop and start this video, but that should be expected. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, and with anything we do, is just going to hit Command J and we're going to duplicate that background so that we have the original version. And then this is going to be the version that we're going to start editing on. Now, this is probably the most difficult part of, this is going to be the most difficult part of this tutorial. And what we need to do is we need to make a selection of this little orb that we have here. So we have this orb and we need to cut the orb out. So yes, all the little fingers and everything like there. And look, you can try as many different selection tools as you want. So we can try to do this with some selection tools first. And you can see, yeah, that didn't work, but so good. Let's go ahead and try to refine this. And that's not picking it up so well. I can make my brush smaller. That is going to help. So we're going to go over here. It's just not recognizing the edges. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to try the new selection tool. In this case, we want the lasso, because the problem with the rectangle is it's probably going to pick up the fingers. So we're going to go ahead and just circle this. And what we're trying to do is identify to Photoshop what areas we want selected and what we don't. Now, this doesn't have to be a perfect selection. You can see I'm going pretty fast. Really, we're just identifying the subject that we want selected. We're not actually trying to select it. And you can see it did a pretty good selection, but it's got a lot of jaggy edges and all kinds of problems. And this is where using the pen tool comes into effect. So I've got the pen tool over here. And look, if you've never used the pen tool, you're probably going to have to watch a tutorial on how to use the pen tool. I will tell you, I'm a photographer, not really a graphic designer, so I don't use the pen tool a lot. That doesn't mean that I can't use the pen tool, but I'm not the best at explaining how the pen tool works. All right, so we have the pen tool activated. Now, one of the things that you want to do when you're using the pen tool is make sure that you've got this little gear selected. And notice I've got something called rubber band, and I've increased the thickness to 3. It's not really making your line that big. It makes it so you can see what you're doing when you're using the pen tool, and I find it to be a little bit easier. Usually you should start near a point like this. So we're going to come down here and we're going to draw. And right now I'm drawing a straight line. I'm not moving that curve at all. And I don't need this to be a perfect selection in this case. So I'll kind of show you how this works. Now it's going to curve a little bit here. So I'm going to go and then I'm going to drag out. I'm holding down with my mouse and dragging out. And then you can see it's making another curve point here that we're probably, that looks pretty good. This here. And you're not supposed to make a whole bunch of different points when you actually use the pen tool, but I'm not really the greatest at using the pen tool, so I'm not trying to make these curves perfect. I'm going to feather this selection so it doesn't need to be like dead on accurate. We're just trying to cut this out. So a lot of times it's just easier for me to make a whole bunch of different points. And if it becomes a little jaggy, that's okay. I'm going to come out here, and once again, I'm going to set a point here and drag out. This is going to allow me to make that curve. And then I'm going to come out here and go up a ways, click and drag. Now we can fix that area back there where it wasn't perfectly aligning. Not a problem. We'll come in here and I'm just going to go ahead and finish this. So we're going to come up here, pull and drag. Try to get that best I can. And pull and drag. Right there, when you get to the end, you see next to the little tool, there's a circle. That means you've completed the path. Now, right in here, I want to adjust this. So I'm going to hold the Command or the Control key. It allows me to hold the Alt key. I can come in here and click on that. and then I can grab these points and I can fiddle with them and try to adjust them and make them a little bigger. I can also drag that point in. So I get that to be a little bit better selection. And look, it's not perfect. I'm going to hold the command and control and just kind of pull this point in a little bit here too. That's not perfect, but that's going to be good enough for my selection. I'm going to be happy with this selection here. What we need to do then is then turn this into a selection at this point. So we don't want it to be a path. We actually want to turn this into what we see up here, which is a selection. So I click selection. It's saying it wants to make a selection. I'm going to feather this at 3 pixels, which is okay. And bam, just like that, we've got a pretty good selection. Now we're going to copy this. So I'm going to hit Command-C or Control-C on a PC. And then we're going to paste this. And so I'm going to hit Command-V and then paste. And so now we've got, this is the little orb or globe that we have. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this blending mode to screen, and that's going to brighten it up. Eventually we're going to keep wanting to brighten and brighten this image up. I'm also going to feather its edge. So I'm going to go up here to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I think we'll just do 10 to start with. So we're filtering that edge, and then we're going to start duplicating this and feathering the edge more and more and more. So I'm going to hit Command-J to duplicate it. Remember, it already has the screen on it. So I'm just going to come up here to blur, hit Gaussian blur, and now I'm going to add more. So we were at 10. So I think I'll add 30. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to hit it again, Command-J. We're going to blur that way more. So we're going to go up here to Command and then Gaussian blur. And we were at 30. So this time I'm going to do 100. And I'm going to hit Command-J again, and we're going to blur it some more. So I'm going to go blur, Gaussian blur. We'll make it 300 this time. And one more time, Command-J, upper to filter, and hit Gaussian blur. And Gaussian blur is always going to be different. It kind of depends on the size of your image and the size of the subject that you're working with. So I'll just do 600, I think. And that looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and group these. So I'm going to hold shift and click on the top layer, hold shift, click on the bottom layer, hit Command or Control G to group. We'll label this as orb, just so we know what it is in this tutorial. And that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and zoom back out. So now I've got this thing, and I'll turn it on and off so you can kind of see what it's doing, right? So we're getting some glow or some shine from that orb, which is exactly what we want. Now, the next thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to colorize the orb, and I can make the orb any color I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click a hue saturation adjustment. And what we're going to do on the hue saturation is click down here on colorize. We see colorize. We're going to go ahead and click that. And if you want, I want more saturation, so I'm going to boost up the saturation a little bit. But in this case, we can do any color that we see here. I'm just going to keep sliding. I can make it green. I can make this. But in this case, I think we're going to do some kind of like a cool, we could either do, yeah, that bluish color looks pretty good right there. Now I can darken this color or lighten this color by sliding this bottom part, which I don't want to do. Or I can increase or decrease the saturation. So I can increase or decrease the saturation. I'm not a huge saturation freak if people have watched my videos, so you won't see me do a lot of saturation a lot of times, but we'll just do a little bit on this one. So I think that looks pretty good. Now, one thing that we can do is we need to create a clipping mask here. We can either hold the Alt option and click in between these layers. So what that is going to do is going to say we want this colorization only to happen on the orb. And there's a reason to do this and not do this, but I'll show you here in a second. We probably don't need to do it because we're eventually just going to go with one color, but this will make sense in a second. So I can click in between the layers, and that's now applying this just to this grouped orb. Or you can come down here into the adjustment and click on this little symbol. That also gives you the clipping path. Those are the two easy ways to do that. Now in this case, we're going to duplicate this layer. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command-J. And I'm going to drag this down under the orb so that we're applying this hue saturation to here. We don't need to clip this one because this is basically the bottom layer. Now, the reason you would do this and have two different layers is sometimes you might want the glow here in your background layer to be completely different. So in this case, if I wanted to change that color and have it be a different color, that would make sense. And you'll see kind of how this works here in a second. But so you can change and make two different colors. In this case, I'm just going to leave both colors exactly the same. In that case, I could have just kept this top layer and have it affect everything, and that would work good that way. All right, so now that we've got this here and the color here, we want to come in here and we need to make an adjustment layer. And what we're going to do in the adjustment layer is we want the adjustment layer to happen on this subject only right here. So we're going to come in here, and I'm actually going to use curves adjustment, and I don't use curves a lot, but today we're going to use curves adjustment layer. So what we're going to do is darken this layer. So I'm just going to gray this out a little bit because we don't want it to get too contrasty. And then I'm going to bring the gamma down here, and this is really going to help us kind of darken this image, which is what we want. I don't want it to get too contrasty. I want it to just get dark, controlling the contrast, which is right here. So we can get it dark, but we don't want to get it too contrasty. So I'm just going to fiddle with this until I'm happy. And that looks pretty good. So now this is applying to this here. To get this glow to come out, what we need to do in this case is now paint into this mask, and we're going to bring back some of the lightness or color here in the image. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I actually want this hue saturation under my levels. I don't want it to affect anything down here. And I'm also going to dial out a little bit of that color. So it's not perfectly cyan as it is here, that we're bringing back some of the original color. We can come back in and adjust that more and more as we go. But when we do the next part, it's going to adjust it a little bit. So we're going to have to come back and slide that. So now I've got this levels here. And so the levels is, remember, where we darken the image. And we're going to come in here and we're going to grab our brush. And I've got my brush at 80% and a flow of about 13, somewhere like that. And you want the color black, and you're going to want a pretty large soft brush. But you'll see me change the brush size as I work. And so what I'm going to do is then just start painting or applying black to hide the adjustment. In essence, it's actually going to brighten this area up. So any place that we see a highlight, you can see these highlights where the globe would be shining on the subject, we're going to brighten up. So we're just keep going over and over and over this because we want to keep brightening this area up. I'm going to have more on the face than I have on other areas. So we're just going to keep looking. You can see this mask, it's getting dark. So we're just going to keep painting here because we want that area to be really bright. And then as it comes out, we don't want it, need it to be quite as bright. So I could flip X and paint a little out. But basically we're trying to illuminate or highlight this. You can see we're just darkening that one single area right there. So we're starting to get some realistic glow happening by painting black into this area. This is where understanding how masks work really makes a huge difference in Photoshop. So if you don't understand what your masks are doing, then you're going to have a difficult time understanding a lot of the concepts of what you're doing here in Photoshop. So that looks pretty good. So let me just zoom out a little bit. So now you can see we're really starting to get the glow. Now we're going to come up here and we're going to do one last adjustment. And we could do it really anywhere. I could do it right above this levels adjustment here if I want to do that, because all we're going to really be affecting is this background image. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and click on the levels adjustment again, and we're just going to make this a little bit darker. Remember, I don't want it to be too contrasty, so I can slide this out so it doesn't get super contrasty, and even though it is going to get quite dark. We'll try that. So we're going to hit Command I to invert that. Now that adjustment isn't showing, so we've hidden the whole adjustment. And then what we're going to do is just kind of the opposite of what we did. We want the color white, and we're going to use that flow. I'm going to make a really big brush. And then basically on all the areas where I don't want the glow to happen, I'm just going to be painting white into those areas. And what that's going to be doing is just darkening it down and giving us even more glow effect. So here, I'm actually going to come on the back side of this hand and paint quite a bit. So we have a nice contrast difference between the background and the foreground. So you can see we're getting quite a bit of that shining through, which is what we want. And then areas over here, we want almost 100% of it. So we're just darkening those areas, and that's looking pretty good. And I think I'm going to make one more of those adjustments. So I'm going to click on that levels right there. We're just going to darken this down, and I'm really darkening my highlights. I probably could have added some here, but we're just really darkening the highlights to really knock that down. And that's all I'm going to do. And then once again, right here in areas that would be very far away from this adjustment, I'm just painting a lot of white in, and that's just darkening those areas just a little bit more than we had. So it's getting rid of some of the highlights. It's not really darkening the shadows as much. So in here, bring this down, backside, dark in here. So what we'll do here then is I kind of zoomed up so we can see this image. So we will turn this off. This is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. So you can see we have quite a difference. Now I can come in here. I think this face just needs a little bit of brightness. So what I'm going to do is come down into the shadow areas. Actually, you don't need it as much in the highlights. Command I to invert the selection. Then we've got the brush, and I can boost these back to up to 100 because I know I'm at 100. And then we're just going to paint into this face just to brighten that up a little bit more so you can see. Yeah, that looks better. So now we've created this cool glow from this orb. We've colorized this image. All right, so one last little thing. If you want to get a little bit more glow out of this area, like it's shining on this person, I'm going to show you a cool little way to do this here. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer because we want to do this on a new layer. And then we're going to grab our brush, and I've got my brush flow down to about 25%. And we're going to pick a color in here, a bright color. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option, click. It's going to give me that color over here. And now what we're going to do with a really large brush. So I want this to kind of cover this whole area, and then I'm going to get a little bit smaller as I do this. So this is my main highlight area that I'm looking at. And what I'm going to do then is just, I'm going to click, and you can see it gives that glow over the face. Now remember, I can reduce the amount of this if we want this, and I can eventually add a mask to it. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller so it doesn't get on the face. And then I'm going to click on that again. And then I'm going to make it smaller and click on that again. And so now we've got this really nice glow coming from this that's illuminating our subject. And that's a pretty easy way to get just a little bit more of that glow effect and add it to this image. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.